Very active personality with respect to Swadeshi Jagran Manch. He has been involved in a lot of activities with us, and he is working for a private company, financial services company. And now I request the chairperson of this session, Nandha Kumar, to take over the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Can we have your attention, please?
Let us be silent. There are more vibrant sessions that are going to happen. We are going to receive a volley of informations. We have heard about coastal thing. Now we are moving on to the agriculture, which is also a vibrant breadwinner for all of us.
Thank you. Friends, before I introduce Dr. Kumar, let me share with you a certain perspective on Indian agriculture so that we will all understand Dr. Kumar and his contribution so much better. See, for all of us in the Swadeshi movement, we all know that agriculture in India is not just an occasion or a trade or an industry. It has always been, and even today predominantly, it is a way of life. It's a way of life where the agricultural activity subsumes into itself social, political, religious, the local crafts, the local industry, animal husbandry, etc., etc., etc. So that agriculture is not an island. It is a superset consisting of so many other activities built into itself. Now, if you take Indian agriculture, for centuries, in fact for millennia, India has been a very successful agricultural economy, and it's had tremendous strength of its own, which was disturbed with the beginning of the Green Revolution and all the subsequent developments after the Green Revolution of the 1960s. Now, the defining characteristics of the Indian agriculture throughout the ages have been 2 or 3 major elements. One of them is its sheer diversity. Every region of the country had its own staple grain, had its own staple supporting food elements. No 2 states had the same staple food until very recently. Depending on the micro climate, depending on the local environment, water and other local sources, every region had its own variety of staple food and other supporting foodstuff. Now, the second defining aspect of Indian agriculture has been that it was extremely in peace and in consonance with the local environment. The proof of that is, for thousands of years we have been doing agriculture in a place like this, let's say the Kaveri Delta, and we have not had any conflict with our environment or the nature until, say, 50 years ago when the Green Revolution was introduced. So you first had tremendous amount of diversity, then you had a practice of agriculture which was in consonance with the local environment and the local resources, the local ecosystem. And the third very important aspect of Indian agriculture was that it was extremely economically very sustainable and very prosperous. All the prosperity of the Kaveri Delta, the temples, the so-called fabled riches of Thiruvananthapuram temple, Padmanabhaswamy temple, etc., etc., were all built on the base of its agricultural prosperity. So we have always been a very prosperous, a very self-sustaining and a very diverse agricultural economy. Now, this was the situation until, say, about 40-50 years ago, and this was disturbed for the first time by the Green Revolution and by several other things which happened between 1960s and today. Now, today, unfortunately, a large section of the Indian agriculture is beginning to fall into a Western paradigm. And what are the defining elements of this Western paradigm of agriculture? First thing is your diversity is destroyed. Now the Green Revolution put enormous emphasis on just two grains, wheat and rice. And the government also tailored all its policies, and to this day the public distribution system knows only of two grains, one is wheat and the other is rice. This was because the Western universities and the Western agriculture research bodies and the Western vested interests knew only these two grains given their own compulsions. Now the entire millet growing, millet consuming habit has dwindled enormously. Fortunately, it has not become totally extinct, but it has dwindled enormously. And there is a very heavy price that we are paying, not just in terms of agriculture, in terms of health, etc., etc. So the first defining element of the Western model of agriculture is destruction of diversity, destruction of heterogeneity. The second defining aspect of the Western paradigm is it is not sustainable. The chemical-based, input-intensive agriculture which began with Green Revolution is obviously not in consonance with the environmental concerns. It is just unsustainable, not only environmentally but also economically. We know this from the fact that our soil fertility has been steadily going down in the last few decades. Initially, yes, the Green Revolution gave us an illusion of increased productivity, but ultimately we were left with soil whose fertility is deteriorating with every crop. The Green Revolution based agriculture was extremely input intensive. It was very unsustainable environmentally also because it required large quantities of water, and we had by then given up millets which require very little quantity of water and which are capable of withstanding droughts very effectively. We had given them up at the instance of the Western research institutions, at the instance of the Western fertilizer companies, and today we are prisoners of two cereals, namely rice and wheat. So the second aspect of the Western agriculture paradigm is it is economically and environmentally unsustainable. And the third very disturbing aspect of the Western agriculture paradigm is it makes agriculture an isolated island of activity. It diverses agriculture from the local ethos, from the local culture, from the local religion, from the local crafts, from the local industries, etc., etc. So, everything which defines the Western model of agriculture is antithesis to what was until 50 years ago the very strength of our agriculture. And one of the popular myths which by sheer repetition has become a gospel is that Indian agriculture was not productive. The traditional Indian agriculture is not capable of producing enough to feed our growing population, etc., etc. People like Nammalwar are not tired of proving it wrong. People like Dharampal, based on British records, have established how the Indian agricultural productivity, be it in areas like Chengalpet district of Tamil Nadu or the Gangetic plains in north, had on a per acre or per hectare basis higher output than what is achieved even today with all the chemical and input intensive agricultural practices. And this was as early as the late 18th century, etc. So it is with this background that we had a very diverse, a very heterogeneous, very economically and environmentally sustaining and a very productive agriculture, which was on top of all this a way of life socially entwined with everything around it. We are now moving, or we have moved in the last 50 years substantially to a model which is monoculture based, which is based on very expensive and increasingly higher and higher levels of inputs, where our diversity has been almost done away with, if not totally extinct, and which has destroyed agriculture as a way of life. So we need to understand these two alternates before we understand Dr. Nammalwar and what he has contributed. Dr. Nammalwar, paradoxically, is a product of the Western agricultural education system, and he was in the Tamil Nadu government service. So he began at that end of the spectrum. Fortunately for us, he very early in his career realized the futility of that model, and ever since then he has been an outstanding pracharak, evangelist, practitioner, preacher, teacher of Indian way of agriculture. An Indian way of agriculture which encompasses not just agriculture as an island of activity, but everything connected to it. Now, many of us who are less than 50 years old, or around 50 including me, we have not seen Vinoba Bhave. And I am choosing Vinobaji's name very consciously. Vinobaji believed in working at the grassroots level. He literally walked the length and breadth of this country. People who are here above 65-70 will remember his famous Padayatras in support of the Bhudan movement, etc. etc. Our Nammalwarji is the Vinobaji of the later part of 20th century. He is the Vinobaji of the earlier part of this 21st century. When he left the government service, he could have very easily confined his convictions, set up his own farm, and have practiced what he wanted to practice within the confines of it. No. He took the hard option. He decided to become a pracharak. I have myself spent a couple of days traveling with him in Chengalpet district, and I know what he has done. He literally, Vinobaji walked. He travels by whatever means of transport that is available, including walking if necessary. He chose to work with the grassroots level. His message has always been very simple, and there is one central philosophy in that. That is, agriculture as practiced in India down the ages is the panacea for all the problems of our rural India. Because that is an agriculture which is prosperous, that's an agriculture which is economically sustaining, that's an agriculture which is environmentally sustainable. And he is, in addition to advocating whatever practices, packages, etc., packages of practices in agriculture, he has always combined with that advocating a certain value system. A certain value system where it is not mere pursuit of productivity or mere pursuit of returns that matters, but a holistic development of human life and human attitude. And today, it is not an exaggeration to say there are several thousand farmers in this part of the country, in Tamil Nadu especially, and I myself know of several of them personally. Thanks to Dr. Nammalwar, and these are not very large farmers owning hundreds of acres, these are small farmers. They live a very purposeful and a very contented life, pursuing agriculture in a manner which sustains them economically, which sustains the environment around them, and they live a very content and a very peaceful life, following not just Dr. Nammalwar's agricultural practices, but also the ethics that he preaches along with it, the value system that he preaches along with it. So that then is the contribution of Dr. Nammalwar, and his contribution becomes all the more vital and inevitable today when the whole country is in the danger of migrating lock, stock and barrel to the Western agricultural model. And another little known aspect of Dr. Nammalwar is that he is also an outstanding crusader. A few years ago, when an American company was granted a license for a neem-based product, a patent for a neem-based product, he took up the cause and along with his colleagues like Dr. Vandana Shiva, etc., fought it in the international forum and saw to it that the patent was cancelled. Now imagine, but for Dr. Nammalwar and his colleagues' effort, we would all be paying a patent fee for a neem-based product which is part of our traditional knowledge system practices for God knows how many centuries. So he is, apart from being a pracharak, an evangelist, etc., he is also a very successful crusader. And it is the neem-based patent is not the only crusade. He has been a crusader against the BT, the proliferation of BT seeds, etc., etc. So in Nammalwar, we are fortunate enough to have a modern-day Vinobaji of the agricultural sector, and I have great pleasure in welcoming him and introducing him. And I now request Dr. Nammalwar to take the microphone. Thank you.